We're going to talk today about social-ecological systems. I've done a lot of work in that area. Next slide, please. Well, yes, our task is talking about social-ecological systems, why they're important, and how they fit with transdisciplinarity. As many of you know, Western science is very well developed, and they've developed traditions of disciplinary approaches so that individual disciplines, individual areas can advance. But this has resulted in a separation of natural sciences from social sciences. But even more seriously, it has resulted in a separation of humans from nature. So what we're trying to do is reconnecting humans to the environment. And that means we have to move from disciplinary science to interdisciplinary science and social science, and preferably transdisciplinary approaches. So the key message here, as Dr. Seixas reminded me to say early on, is that the importance of using social ecological systems if we want to tackle the local and global environmental problems. Next, please. What does it involve using the social ecological systems approach? The basic assumptions are that using a systems point of view, there are really two major subsystems, social and ecological, but they're not separate. They're closely interconnected in a two-way relationship. And they're equally important. That's why we don't use the term, or at least I don't, socio-ecological, which means mainly ecological, just modified with a little bit of socio. Here we want to identify, we want to recognize that each subsystem is very important on its own, and they're equal. They're not just a modification of the other. Now that connection is the main issue, and this human nature connection is a big problem in Western environmental philosophy. The indigenous people I work with don't have that problem because they don't share the kind of assumptions that we have in Western science. I have some references there. The one I like a lot is Gregory Bateson's work, the 1979 book, for example, Mind and Nature. So what we're trying to do here is using not a discipline and not the separation between people and environment, but we're changing the narrative and using the unit of analysis as this integrated social ecological system. It's not easy, but we do it. We don't do it all that well, but we do it. And I hope you might consider using it in your work as well. Now, here we're talking about reconnecting people with nature, not just because we need resources, but there's also a cognitive and emotional linkage in that human nature interactions. And that's really important. And one way to appreciate the importance is also appreciating indigenous knowledge. A lot more on that later on. And one of your speakers, Dr. Brondizio, has a recent review on this, and you may want to look at it. I have references throughout this presentation, and I believe Brondizio is also one of your speakers, and you'll hear from him firsthand. Next, please. Well, we started using the term SES in the book I did with Carl Folke in 1998, linking social and ecological systems. And at the time, we were really trying to bring humans into the resilience analysis. Buzz Holling was working on resilience, and that area was developing very fast. But it's basically an ecological area. So we had a We had meetings in Stockholm and we worked on it, and we said, okay, well, let's do the background for the people part of this resilience, and so we can apply resilience ideas not just to ecosystems but to social ecological systems. Well, so SES is in the family of complex adaptive systems. And the two parts, the two big subsystems, are intertwined and they co-evolve, which means they're really, really connected very tightly. And that also means you can't pull them apart. You can't pull them apart and still make sense. So I gave some key readings that Dr. Seixas asked for, and I'll summarize one of them, the paper by Liu in Science, which is a very strong argument for this interlinkage. This paper looked at the complexity of 6 very well-known SES cases, all of them showing various characteristics of complex systems, nonlinear dynamics, thresholds, surprises, time lags. And these complexity features were not evident when analyzed by natural scientists on their own or social scientists on their own. They became apparent only when the full SES was taken as the unit of study. It's really an eye-opening paper. Take a look at it. Next, please. You've seen a lot of definitions, but let's just be clear about what I'm talking about, because you might have seen different definitions. Social-ecological systems, we talk about integrated complex adaptive systems. That's the full technical term, complex adaptive systems, that include social and ecological subsystems in a two-way feedback relationship. Complex adaptive systems, many definitions. The one I like is that it's a network of components and interrelationships that cannot be described by a few rules, because their order, structure, and function emerge from the interactions. So they're difficult to get a handle on, and a lot of scientists don't like the term because it's a concept that's sort of moving as you work on it. Transdisciplinary approach. I'm again, many definitions. I'm using the one from Ratana Chuen Pagdi and Sven Jentoft's 2019 book. They said, these transdisciplinary approaches are partially based on natural science that seeks universal knowledge, but also on social science that offers context-specific knowledge. Now, that you might dispute that, but that's how they see it. So a transdisciplinary approach integrates different kinds of knowledge and includes the social values and interests of stakeholders and issues of power. So they really get into some of the politics or political economy of this. So you got to do not just an integration of disciplines, but according to these authors, you need to include social values and you need to include stakeholder interests and issues of power. Next, please. So visually, that's how we see it. The complex adaptive systems, two arrows, two-way arrows. You've got social systems and they're nested. So you got, for example, a jurisdictional scale, which could be starting at the municipal level, state level, national level, international level. You can have nested ecosystems, which can be a tree and a stand of trees and a forest and a biome, like the Atlantic forest biome. I believe that's where you are in right now, the Atlantic forest biome. Next, please. Now, in this talk, I'm going to use SES examples mainly in the context of conservation and using biocultural approaches. Of course, biocultural, you know, is already by definition an SCS approach, because it's got the bio and it's got the cultural. The argument runs like this. We're doing conservation. How do we do it? Most biodiversity is in lands and waters actually used by people. So conservation depends on understanding their motivations on conserving or not, and their knowledge and values. So here we get into indigenous and local knowledge. So here on, I'm using ILK, following IPBES terminology, and I better, because your room is full of IPBES people, including Dr. Seychelles, so I would be in trouble if I didn't. Okay, so there's a bit of a history to this. We have in the past relied entirely or largely on people-free protected areas for conservation. But, you know, it's a losing battle, because people-free protected areas are really islands. And those of you who are in ecology know a theory called island biogeography theory. If you have an island, it will lose in time, it will lose species and other kinds of biodiversity. There's no way around it. So having your protected area as an island is really not a very good idea. But you also have to recognize that world is not consisting of used and unused areas. There's no such thing as pristine ecosystems, maybe except in Antarctica, even though even that's not very pristine, because they have all the chemicals falling off the sky. There is a big literature now. I cite the one by Ellis in PNAS, Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. People have shaped most of terrestrial nature for at least 12,000 years. 12,000 years. And that terrestrial nature does include the Atlantic forest region you're in. It includes the Amazon. It includes the North American prairies, where I am talking from. So, you know, just drop the idea of a pristine nature and look at humans and do the conservation with humans in it. So biodiversity, I'm arguing, can only be conserved by the people living with it. One example of that are these indigenous community conserved areas, which are really important. ICCAs, I'm going to be coming back to that back and forth. Next, please. So we're looking at biocultural SCS applications. I haven't abandoned my topic. We're still talking complex systems, and we're still talking transdisciplinarity. So that's always in the background. We have a paper by Gavin et al. That says, in no uncertain terms, effective biodiversity conservation requires dynamic, pluralistic, partnership-based approaches. That's it. So, what's a biocultural approach? Well, considering biological and cultural approaches and diversity together. So it includes what I've been working on off and on, community-based conservation, those ICCAs. It includes co-management, and it includes increasingly knowledge co-production, which is the big hot topic now. Everybody's having a meeting on knowledge co-production, and U.S. National Academy of Sciences has a project chaired by one of our colleagues, probably known to many of you, Bonnie McKay. So all those areas are SCS applications. They're all complex systems. They're all transdisciplinary. Wish I had time to give you more of a history, but I don't have the time. But But getting the people into conservation as opposed to people-free PAs seriously starts with IUCN, the World Conservation Union, in 1975. The resolution in their meeting in Kinshasa, Africa, CBD, that I hope everybody knows about, is signed in 1992. That's a very important step globally. IUCN's Durban Congress, and of course IPBS. It's been going since 2012, and that's our big hope for conservation and biodiversity. Next, please. Okay, so here's the list of the examples I'm going to give you. I've chosen them fairly broadly. I could have picked some other set of examples. For example, in a chapter we just completed with Dr. Seixas and Dr. Daniele Kalikowski, is also Brazilian, works in FAO Rome. We use completely different set of examples, but here's what I'm going to use now. 3 sets. One, I'm going to talk about different kinds of traditional conceptualizations of biocultural SES. Then I'm going to give 2 examples of knowledge co-production. And third, I'm going to talk about 2 examples of biocultural SES restoration. Next, please. And here we have our first example. In Hawaii, this is the traditional system in Hawaii, pre-colonization. They have something called the ahupua'a. Ahupua'a is a wedge-shaped land, if it's a volcanic island, a wedge-shaped land unit, and it's considered a unit with the people and the land. This is very important. When you ask a native Hawaiian, he will tell you he's from that particular piece of land. But of course, land use in Hawaii has changed a great deal, so it's become very difficult for Hawaiians to talk about the land they belong to. But you see this in almost all of the Pacific Islands, including New Zealand. If you ask a Maori where they are from, they will give you a very elaborate description of the land of which they are a part. So this traditional conceptualization is a very formal ritual statement of I belong to that piece of land. It's not all that unique to Polynesia either. Apparently, I haven't done any work on this, but apparently the Scottish people had this in Scotland, old Scotland. They would also talk about a piece of land that they're from, and so on. This ahupua'a typically has a forested mountain zone protected by taboo. That's one of the few English words that actually comes from Polynesian languages, taboo. And then it's got integrated farming zones in the upland area and then in the lowland coastal area, and a fringe of coconut palms. It's really a very neat ecosystem. It even includes a seawater or brackish water fish ponds at the, I don't have a pointer, but you can see that dark blue, that's the fish pond. So it's a very neat, bounded ecosystem, and it has the people in it. Next, please. There's not much of the original land use left, but this is from Kawika Winter's paper, a very big paper with one of those papers with millions of authors in ecology and society, and it shows a lowland landscape. These are agroecosystems, and they're really mixed. They grow lots of things, and the lower picture is also an agroecosystem and showing a berm, and Kawika, who's an ecologist, talks about um, ecosystem services, and how this lithic berm, the basically a wall, uh, helps with ecosystem services like moisture retention and erosion prevention. Next. We're moving on. The next example, I take you to Australia. Indigenous Australians talk about caring for country. So caring is like stewardship, and country is basically the ecosystem or the social ecological system. We had a graduate student who, Melanie Zorba, she's now a professor at Dalhousie University in Halifax. And I'm dedicating this to all of those PhD students who have dozens of questions, research questions. Melanie had just one. She went there visiting the Giringut indigenous group in Queensland, and she just asked one question. What does caring for country mean to you? And she had a very a rather unique approach to the answer. She was using participatory art. As you know, Indigenous Australians are great artists. At least some of them produce great art. And Melanie herself is an artist. So she said, show us in art, what does caring for country mean to you? And they painted. Now, the other key point is that Indigenous Australians have this term, healthy country, healthy people, which shapes their worldview. Again, where country means land or the ecosystem. And next, this is what it looks like. I like this a lot. I used it in the recent resilience book we published. And it's a two-way arrow. Healthy country needs healthy people, and healthy people need healthy country. So the health of both of these, or each of these two subsystems, depend on the other. This is different from the Western notion. In Western notion, yes, a healthy nature is good for you, but nature doesn't need your help to be healthy. But for Indigenous Australians, it does. It does. So what people do on the land makes the land healthy, and then land in turn makes them healthy. Next, please. Back to our artists. This is Melanie's focus group, and they produced that large piece of art. Different artists paint different parts. And there's quite a bit that helps me explain that link between social and ecological. Next, please. So the cultural dimensions of this caring for country in the upper left corner of the photo, I mean the painting, is the snake, Girimor. It's a dreamtime creature. Dreamtime is something unique for Indigenous Australians. And it's the snake that carved out the features of the land and the waters. The lower right middle are the three spiritually important and large creatures: stingray, the dugong, which is a large sea mammal, and the sea turtle. And the painting, interestingly, also has modern components. One of the artists painted in the lower right corner declining wildlife habitat due to urban encroachment. I'll show you again in the next one, please. Okay, so imagine I have a pointer. Upper left corner is the snake carving the features of the land in green and features of the sea in blue. Look at the middle and then just slide down a bit. You have the three spiritually important animals, the dugong, the stingray, and the turtle. And all the way to the lower right, you see suburban subdivisions encroaching on the habitat of endangered species. Like, I'm not quite sure how to say that. Are there any Australians in the group? You can. There's even a chainsaw in the picture. You can see just where the habitat is. So that is the painting. Next, please. And we move on to the third example. Now I'm taking you to Canada. This is a World Heritage Site called Pimachowin Aki. Aki meaning land. Pimachowin Aki means land that gives life. It's in the middle of Canada, part of it in Manitoba, part of it in Ontario. And the two photos, this is a hunting camp. This is not the community. It's a hunting camp in a recovering burnt over area, nice and green and lots of animals. The tent you see in blue is not a sleeping tent, it's a cooking tent, and there is some smoked moose meat being prepared. The lower photo is one of the cabins we were sleeping in, and next to me is a young guy who adopted me. Yeah, next please. It's a beautiful area. It's not mountainous, it's fairly flat, but lots of water, lots of forests. So far, commercial forestry is at the southern boundary of this area, but especially with climate change, we're going to get forests farther north. Next, please. These are Anishinaabe people, also known as Ojibwa, and the First Nation in Canada, we talk about First Nations, meaning individual tribal groups, or rather sub-tribal groups. Now, compared to the Australian concept, there's the corresponding Anishinaabe concept. They talk about keeping the land. And when you ask them about what does it involve keeping the land, they say, well, you do all the management, all the conservation tasks together. I shouldn't have said management because they don't use the word management because management implies control. And in the Ojibwa idea, worldview, people don't control the land, but they can be stewards, they can manage it, they can keep it. For example, the elders of the Pikangikum First Nation laugh at the notion of protected areas. They do have a provincial park in their area. It's a Caribou Provincial Park, and the elders laugh openly. They say, well, who's going to tell the caribou to stay in the park because it's their protected area? In the photo, what he's doing is he's harvesting a live tree. That's a birch, paper birch. And certain times of the year, you can cut large chunks of the bark to make things like baskets, and it'll recover. And you can do it again next year. Next. Just to give you the difference in the Ojibwa concept of ecosystem renewal, I'm quoting from two elders. Whitehead Moose is the first elder. He says, when the forest gets too old, it can no longer produce animals. They get tired of eating old food. The creator knows animals can't continue to do this, so the creator brings fire to the land through the thunderbird. Thunderbird is a mythical creature, but it's real enough for Pikangikum people that they actually talk about Thunderbird nests, and they showed me one because I didn't believe them. They mentioned it to one of our students, and I said, like, I mean, these are Ojibwa, they're pulling your leg. Like Thunderbirds don't have nests. So I went up there and they said, okay, here's the nest. The second quote is from Matthew Strang. Sorry. It's back. And it points out that when you have a natural fire, the ground becomes green the next year and lots of animals. But if you go to a cutover area in the southern fringe, and what they do is they do a lot of clear cutting in Canada, as I guess they do in Brazil. And then they, I guess, unlike Brazil, to get the forest, they plant trees, but they plant monocultures. That's one of the reasons why Canada had horrendous fires last year, because they're even-aged and same species. And it's a bad trend. But Matthew points out that when you go to a forest plantation, you don't see any animals or birds. Next, please. This is the second cluster. I'm going to talk about a couple of co-management examples, and one is an area that I've done a lot of work myself. This is the James Bay area, and it's a protected area I'm talking about with an unpronounceable Cree name. It's initiated by the Cree First Nation called Weminji. It's in the province of Quebec, the French-speaking province in James Bay. And we were working with the First Nation, and we were doing capacity building and knowledge co-production. So these Weminji people plus people from 4 universities. University of Manitoba, McGill was taking the lead, Concordia, and University of British Columbia. It's an ICA, it's a community conserved area. And if you ask the Cree, yes, it's a conservation area, but it's more than a conservation area. Because they want to protect 2 of their rivers from hydroelectric development. Again, like Brazil, in Canada, whenever you have a large river, somebody is trying to build a dam on it. And the whole James Bay area is just full of dams. But Weminji has these 2 smaller rivers that don't have dams on them, and they want to keep it that way. And also this protected area is about reaffirming their rights and for identity and cohesion of the community, cultural needs. Next. Here's our protected area planning group. We're in a tent, and lots of the people are the local people, and this particular session is about setting the boundaries. At the podium is the community coordinator. Next to him is the project head from McGill University. Closest to you, the closest 4 people to you are 2 of our university colleagues, profs, and 2 graduate students, including our Quebec student at the University of Manitoba, Claude, who worked with me. I use this picture a lot. I show it to our international students, like students from Africa, and I tell them sometimes this is how we do our parks planning, and they're amazed. They never think of Canada doing parks planning right with the community, right in their tent, but we do only sometimes. Next. The cabin is where we were sleeping. The tent again is a cooking tent. If you go inside, we're smoking fish. You can see that. The lower 2 pictures show the environment. This is the boreal zone, the northern forest, sparse forest on the coast. You see the water, James Bay is the water. The islands are like tundra. Only when you go inland you see trees. The 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 photo, the lower left photo is interesting. At the very left is a McGill University professor who's a environmental philosopher. You know, philosophers don't do field work, and this was he was probably in his 50s at the time, but he said this was the first time he's actually been in the field. And I said that's really very healthy for a professor of environmental philosophy. Next. This is one of my favorite examples. So we're talking about knowledge co-production again. And this is northern Norway. So we're talking about Sami people, indigenous people. They monitor snow. And they're herders, they're reindeer herders. You know, indigenous knowledge is often different from Western science, but can you put them together? In other words, can you do co-production? Because the ILK of the Sami uses qualitative assessment, and it's very verbal qualitative assessment, a lot of terminology, whereas of course science uses as much as possible quantitative assessment. So this example is about climate change and snow monitoring and showing why local observations are pertinent. Next. We're in the field. This is northern Norway near the Arctic Ocean, and the Sami herders. I've joined a bunch of Sami herders. It's near the town of Kautokeino, which is considered the cultural center for the Sami. And we're checking the snow conditions, and we want to help the reindeer move. You see reindeer in the horizon. That's a herd. The issue is climate change is affecting snow conditions, so the herders have to be really careful. Next. Now, the reindeer, as you probably know, they eat lichens, like caribou and reindeer. They're subspecies. They eat lichens in the winter. That's not what they eat in the summer. They have better food in summer, but in the winter, that's the only food they can reach. And when they are digging into the snow to eat the lichens, they are trampling and compacting the snow. And that makes it difficult to dig to their food. So after a while, they can't reach their food. They have to move to a new area. So how do they move? Next. Well, they move with the help of people and dogs. It's a family group that owns the herd that comes in. It's usually 3, 4 people, 3, 4, 5 people, and a bunch of dogs. Now, they're not actually moving the herd. Sami believe that the reindeer decide when to move, and the Sami are there just to help them move, but also to check the snow conditions because they want to make sure they can reach the lichens in the new area they're moving to. So here we're moving. Next. The person with the yellow earmuffs is the chief herder. His name is Aslak. He has a shovel and he's making a snow profile to check the snow conditions in the area that the reindeer are moving towards. The problem is freezing rain, which has become a major problem because of climate change. It's raining and freezing when it's not supposed to, and that results in crusting. And you know what that does. A lot of caribou in northern Canada have died because they can't dig through the crust and reach the food. Here, the reindeer are lucky because they have Aslak who's going to check it for them. Next. When Aslak makes this profile, he's looking at crusting. But basically, the Sami use qualitative data. They see crusting 2 or 3 layers. You can vaguely see that's the darker band in the snow. But he figured the reindeer will be okay with, they're not very strong crusts. Of course, he's communicating this information not only with his whole family, but also with all the other herders. So everybody has a good idea about what the snow conditions are everywhere. And the reindeer not the reindeer, the Sami coordinate snow depth in terms of ankle deep, knee deep, hip deep. Just 3 categories. So I said, well, Aslak, so how come you have a tape measure? And he said, oh, well, that's not for us. That's for the government. Because we report to the government on the snow depth. Plus, one more item, ground temperature. The government knows the air temperature, but they don't know the ground temperature, and that's rather important. And you can see the temperature gauge. It's at the base of the measuring tape, the dark color. So he's reporting that to the government. It's not information he needs, but he collects it for the government. But the information he gives his colleagues, his other Sami reindeer herding colleagues, on a whole bunch of variables, crusting being the most important of them. Next. So the lesson from the Sami is that first of all, they really know their snow. Their snow terminology is richer than the Inuit, believe it or not. The critical, although they check many things, the critical one is freezing rain in winter and the crusting it makes. They can't prevent the freezing rain, but they know how to deal with it. They avoid it, they monitor it, and they communicate it. Their own monitoring is qualitative, but they collect quantitative data for the government. So this is one of the very few cases we know, at least I know, that science relies on ILK to supplement scientific information. Next. Okay, the third cluster, and I'm beginning to run out of time here, so quickly here. We go back south. We're in Thailand. Also, please note, we're in the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, started in 21. Mangroves have been degraded in many of these tropical, subtropical areas, mainly by shrimp farms. The few I know in Brazil look pretty good, actually. I'm not sure they've cleared any mangroves, but I do know they have in Philippines. So what you see in Thailand here in the next photos is happening in Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and others. Next. Next, please. So we're in a field trip. We're getting briefed. A healthy mangrove is what it looks like on the right. And we have the lower left. This is Marta from Brazil, who was part of that field trip. And the key photo is the one on the lower right. What they do is they plant a series of mangrove seedlings, and then they establish a barrier, a wood barrier, so the seedlings won't be swept away by the tides. And then they plant another bunch of seedlings, another barrier, another bunch of seedlings. So the ones closest to the remaining forest grow first, and then it moves out into the sea. Next, please. Okay, the last example is fish ponds. This is Oahu, Hawaii. It's part of the Ahapoa, as I mentioned in the first example. And these are built at stream mouths. They're rock walled, but not cemented. It's basically indigenous aquaculture, a low input traditional aquaculture. And restoring them have become part of Hawaii's indigenous revival movement. And there's a whole collection of papers edited by Winter, Chang, and Lincoln. Next, please. Starting at the upper left, we're walking to the area because all the rich people have bought the coastal areas. You can't pass through their land, so we have to pass through the water. And here we just got to the fish pond. It's the remains of a fish pond because they get knocked down by hurricanes and so on. So the task is to rebuild. It's a community task. There's a whole bunch of us rebuilding it on the lower two photos. There actually is a trained architecture as part of the group. These are mostly native Hawaiians, not all of them. I was there too, but I can't see myself in the photos. After a day's work, we actually restored about half of the fish pond. You can see the opening of the fish pond, but you can also see the part of the wall that still needs work. And so it goes. So this is happening, and it's really biocultural, and it's good SES biocultural restoration. Next, please. Just two important points before we end up. One is the importance of the use of indigenous and local knowledge, as any IPES people will tell you. Next, please. And the other is, how do we deal with knowledge? We bridge knowledge by using different kinds of knowledge together while respecting the integrity of each. And then we can co-produce knowledge. Remember, in the Sami case, they were not mixing the two kinds of knowledge, they were supplementing one with the other. Maria Tango and colleagues in Sweden have talked about this as the multiple evidence-based approach, where each of these roots is one kind of knowledge, and out of that you can bridge them and enrich it, but you also co-produce knowledge. According to Nordstrom and colleagues, also Swedes, co-producing knowledge has to be context-based, pluralistic, interactive, and goal-oriented. In other words, you have to solve a particular problem. Next, please. So conclusions are pretty simple because we've already talked much of that. SES is the integrated concept we need to be able to tackle real problems. It recognizes the interconnectedness of social systems and ecological systems. If you take disciplinary approaches, you can do some very good science or very good social science, but you're only looking at one piece of a problem, and that's not going to be adequate. You do need interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary team approaches because you can't do it all yourself. So it's got to be teams. It's got to be teams. Dealing with the social side of SES requires attention to knowledge and values of the people involved, and that has to be the key part of interdisciplinarity. Again, there may be some experts who would disagree, but I'm following Ratana and Sven Jantoft. So you got to bridge different kinds of knowledge, respecting integrity of each, and then you can co-produce knowledge to tackle specific local, global, environmental problems. Next, please. Dr. Seixas provided a template for us to crunch down the message. So what's our responsibility? Well, there's an environmental responsibility in that sustainability issues are, by their very nature, they're complex. issues. They require a complex adaptive systems approach. What could be our commitment? Change the narrative for people and environment. These are not separate systems. They are related systems. And you can commit to a transdisciplinary approach, and you can be a good team member. That's our commitment. On the engagement side, well, participation of the people affected by the decision or the impact. As researchers, we have to be good listeners, and we have to look for real participation and not token participation. Next, please. Okay, so this is, I guess, my final points and talks. In your current project or work or thesis, please check and see how your project deals with complexity and SES. And secondly, is there scope in your project for knowledge co-production? And is there adequate participation? The second activity, if your project is in the area of conservation, defined broadly, does it deal with complexity and SES? You know, it really should. And secondly, are there any lessons from the examples here to help you develop better approaches to conservation, SES management, and restoration? So, next one, I think, is a thank you. Next, please. We thank the supporters of this this seminar series, this course, FAPESP, and the event is by NEPAM, and we thank the Sao Paulo School of Advanced Science for this transformative change seminar. Thank you so much.